Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Police Accountability and Alternatives, brought to you by the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration, also known as MI-CEMI. My name is Daniel Jones. I am the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for MI-CEMI, and I will also be your moderator. Today's webinar is also co-sponsored by MI-CEMI member organizations Detroit Justice Center and LINC Up Grand Rapids. For those of you who may not know, the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration is a broad-based, statewide, nonpartisan collaboration representing nonprofit, faith-based, advocacy, grassroots, and service organizations united to end mass incarceration in Michigan. MI-CEMI is dedicated to leveraging individual and organizational power to reduce our prison and jail populations in this state, while also seeking to create and restore safe and healthy communities. If you're interested in joining MI-CEMI, stick around, and towards the end of the webinar, I'll tell you exactly how to become a member. If you've been following MI-CEMI's webinars, you will know this is the third webinar centered around front-end diversion and alternatives to the current criminal punishment system. We started off the year with our webinar in January, focused on behavioral health and criminal justice diversion, and that was with the National Association of Social Workers Michigan chapter. And our February webinar was focused on restorative justice as diversion. We had experts discuss restorative justice in schools, communities, and how those practices can be used to create healthier environments of healing and care. If you've missed any of MI-CEMI's past webinars, you can go to our YouTube page, hit the subscribe button, and view them there. This leads us to today's discussion around police accountability as diversion to the criminal legal system. To help navigate today's discussion, MI-CEMI has assembled a panel of activists and advocates who will present on the work they're doing around police accountability and alternatives to the criminal legal system. Also, if during today's discussion you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who are joining us via MI-CEMI's live stream on Facebook, feel free to put your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them live. And now let's introduce our guests. We have with us today Erin Keith, who currently serves as Managing Policy Counsel for the Detroit Justice Center. In this capacity, she leads the organization's policy strategy and analyzes legislation to remove legal barriers in the criminal legal system. Erin formerly served as a staff attorney in the legal services and advocacy practice at DJC. In this role, she focused on criminal legal system reform through a racial equity lens by providing direct representation to indigent and or formerly incarcerated clients. Erin has also led the organization's youth empowerment efforts by developing Know Your Rights workshops and other outreach programming for local students. Please welcome Erin Keith. Also, we have joining us today, Shelli Weisberg, who joined the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan staff in 2003 to continue the ACLU's longstanding commitment to a proactive legislative agenda in Lansing. First as the lobbyist and now as the political director, Shelli is responsible for designing and directing advocacy campaigns to achieve ACLU policy priorities in state and local governments and through state ballot initiatives. The ACLU campaigns are a combined effort involving legislative, legal, public education, and organizing tactics to achieve systemic change necessary to achieve the vision set forth in our Constitution. Please welcome Shelli Weisberg. Also joining us is Willie Patterson and Isaac DeGraaf of LINC Up Grand Rapids. Willie Patterson is the Director of Engagement at LINC Up and brings more than a decade of expertise and vision to the team. Patterson, self-described as having a servant's heart, has worked with community members in areas of civic organization, education, leadership, and in workforce development opportunities. He worked tirelessly on establishing a bridge of communication, sharing the opportunities found within the community and through community partners. Please welcome Willie Patterson. Isaac DeGraaf who is the Advocacy Liaison at LINC, is responsible for advancing advocacy efforts and increasing civic engagement opportunities in the community. LINC's mission is to advance a racial equity agenda in Grand Rapids, Michigan by expanding affordable housing, reducing the racial wealth gap, and increasing community power. Before joining the team at LINC, Isaac worked for a large affordable housing nonprofit in West Michigan and served as an AmeriCorps Vista within the City of Flint's planning department. Please welcome Isaac DeGraaf. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, to kick things off, I want to start with you, Erin. Definitely have heard a lot about the work that the Detroit Justice Center is doing around police accountability as diversion, and would definitely just love for you to share with us the work that you're involved with at DJC.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. All right, so we're going to talk about divesting and to invest as police accountability. And I'm going to cover some of the work that we've been doing at DJC in this landscape, and then also provide other data that just supports the case for divesting to invest. So who we are. Detroit Justice Center is a team of advocates, attorneys, organizers, and researchers. We use a three-pronged approach to our work, which includes defense, offense, and dreaming. So our defensive work is work like indigent defense, primarily doing lower level misdemeanor crimes, child support debt and custody proceedings, particularly for those who have been system involved or formerly incarcerated individuals who are coming home owing substantial amounts of child support debt and having various custody concerns with regard to regaining custody of their children. We also assist in certain eviction cases, especially where there's an issue surrounding illegal eviction or police-assisted eviction. Our movement lawyering work, which primarily is our lawsuits and things of that nature. For example, suing the county jail with other partner organizations regarding COVID conditions and things of that nature. Our offensive work includes economic equities work, so developing community land trusts and other ways to increase community wealth. And then our dreaming work involves our divest invest work and our restorative justice network. And then the policy work, which I'm managing policy counsel at the Detroit Justice Center. So it kind of touches on all three prongs because there's elements of everything you do in policy. And so that's the defense, offense, and dreaming prong. And then our mission is kind of partnering to create just cities. So we work together with community groups to eliminate racial and class inequity and to repair the harms caused by mass incarceration in order to create cities where true justice and public safety can coexist. So how did we get here to really working on police accountability and diversion? Well, one of the things we noticed in our work regarding traffic stops and helping people regain their driver's license was that a lot of people did not have a valid license and they had warrants kind of all over various municipalities throughout Michigan. And so we were noticing that many of the people, the underlying offense that kind of led them to even being in this rabbit hole of fines and fees that they couldn't get out of was a single traffic ticket. A single traffic ticket could lead an individual to not be able to pay it and then have a suspended license and then start getting misdemeanors and racking them up all over the place. So we began documenting the problem to help identify the solution. And in combination with other stakeholders and in collaboration with their efforts, there was a lot of data that came out. So Pew Charitable Trust found that driving without a valid license is the third most common reason that people are booked into Michigan jails. And driving without a valid license was the most serious charge at jail admission for 12% of Black men and 15% of Black women, compared to 6% for both white men and women. And so we began to ask, how does this happen? And that's what led to our highway robbery report, which literally documents how Metro Detroit cops and courts steer segregation and drive incarceration, basically a term that we like to call transit apartheid. And the bottom line is that it starts with over-policing certain people in certain communities to generate revenue. So that led us to kind of be more interested in the divest invest conversation. It's always been something that we've prioritized at DJC, but we began to see how much it intersected with various aspects of our other work. And so all of us kind of began studying that and learning more about it. And in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we became asked to speak about it more often. And so we wanted to make sure we on our team understood it, knew the numbers, and worked with our community partners to make sure that we were showing up in a good way in the community with regard to this issue. So I like to start by explaining what divest invest is. So divesting from policing just means divesting from the criminal punishment system, carceral bureaucracies, and their actors. This can mean divesting from policing, but might also include divesting from jails, prisons, detention centers, and other problematic private actors like bail bonds companies. It also can mean investing in communities, moving resources to communities to invest in the things that would in fact make those communities safer and more equitable. It allows communities impacted by over-policing and mass incarceration to drive the solution. So what does that mean? Well, when you look at this data point, it shows that how the various police shootings in 2020 began. Many of them started as a mental illness welfare check. Some began as a traffic stop. Some began as a nonviolent domestic disturbance. Others began as other nonviolent offenses. Ultimately, 58% of killings began when police responded to nonviolent incidents. And I think that's important to note for the simple fact that when we think of a police shooting, we don't think about all of these various entry points that a person has to even interacting with a police officer. And so part of our goal with figuring out ways to divest from policing to invest in communities is by limiting the number of interactions an individual might even have with police. And reforming the system that way to decrease the number of interactions certain communities have with police. So in Detroit, here we see that in fiscal year 2020, Detroit spent $317 million on the Detroit Police Department from the city's general fund, which is far more than the $22.5 million it spent on housing or the $12.7 million it spent on health. That basically means that 1 out of every $3 from the city's general fund is spent on police. Including other funds such as state and federal grants, the total DPD budget for fiscal year 2020 was $330 million. And of course, that budget continues to grow. Why is that important? Well, what do we do with all of this money? Detroit Police Department is actually not considered necessarily effective at keeping our communities safe. Detroit has one of the lowest rates for solving violent crimes in the country. The DPD's average arrest rate for murder investigations from 2010 to 2017 was 41%. The DPD's average arrest rate for rape investigations was around 12%. Half of all criminal prosecutions in Michigan are for minor traffic offenses like driving with a suspended license. And many of these offenses directly criminalize poverty and do nothing to improve public safety. And that leads us to confront the myth that police don't address the root cause of crime. There's no correlation between the number of police officers and crime rates. And that's largely because individuals who commit crimes are caught after the fact, right? So the crime itself still occurs. The harm to the community still occurs. Most of the time, police are responding after an incident of violence or after something has already transpired. And I do see the chat, but it's kind of hard with me sharing my screen to read. So feel free to chime in, Danny, if there's something I need to know.
Will do.
Thanks. So why divest invest is necessary? Continue. So looking at another municipality, Dearborn, as the police budget goes up, community resources have seen their budget shrink, including water and sewer, parks and recreation, public works, libraries, housing, and downtown development. The total police budget for Dearborn is $47.1 million. Up from only 25% in 2017, the Dearborn Police Department now receives 35% of the city's general fund. So as police funding takes up more and more, other departments need to become self-sustaining or lose funding. And how do police use that money? Well, in 2021, Dearborn Police spent $1.96 million on weapons and $2.37 million on overtime and holiday pay. Meanwhile, Dearborn shuttered its health department in 2013 and has had inadequate resources to respond to recent flooding in the area. So it begs the question, how could the city's funds be better distributed? Another interesting point from a racial justice standpoint, in terms of why divest invest is necessary. Overall costs for service and serious charges went down. 73% of all arrests in Dearborn are made in the region that borders Detroit, and Black people are disproportionately targeted. 54% of people arrested are Black, while only 4% of Dearborn residents are Black. So what does that mean? Dearborn Police Department spends millions of dollars each year to criminalize and arrest Black Detroiters, which is something most Black Detroiters know very well. The police are not effective at addressing harm. Over 80% of the Border Crime Initiative teams arrest. And yes, you heard that right. Not the border between Detroit and Canada, the border between Detroit and Dearborn. There was a unit that existed called the Border Crime Initiative. And they made arrests mostly for misdemeanors. Serious crimes went down in 2020 and arrest rates are even lower. There were only 229 auto thefts that were reported in 2020. But even with that low number, only 46 arrests resulted. Accountability for Dearborn, which is another one of our partners, has found that only 10% of arrests in Dearborn are conducted for reasons of violence or interpersonal harm. Now we're going to look at Livonia quickly. So Livonia's total police budget is $26.5 million, and it pays for a lot of things, but 2 out of every $3 in Livonia's budget are spent on police and fire. So in 2021, Livonia spent $283 per capita on police, and that's compared to the amount it spends on public works and the court. How do police use this money? Are they using it for community safety? Well, in 2019, Livonia made 4,700 arrests, but issued over 30,000 minor citations. 60% of those arrested were Black, when Livonia's population is less than 5% Black. So we know who Livonia is policing. Livonia also spends $6 million more on police than parks, libraries, public works, the court, and downtown development combined. Lastly, Ferndale. So Ferndale spent $338 per capita on police. Of the 18,504 calls to service received by Ferndale PD last year, only 8.7% were labeled high priority. The rest were civil matters and complaints, abandoned vehicles, etc. Yet in 2020, Ferndale police arrested 528 people, and of these, 35 involved use of force. For comparison, Livonia police used force 34 times in 2019, but made 4,700 arrests. So it begs the question, why are Ferndale police more likely to use force? Well, again, from a racial justice lens, Ferndale's population is 6.3% Black, but 59.5% of the people arrested in Ferndale in 2020 were Black. So this indicates what, again, many Black Detroiters know very well, is that when you cross that bridge over 8 Mile Road, you're policed in a different way, and mostly for minor traffic infractions. So to wrap things up, what else could we do with this money? What could the city of Detroit do with $317 million? How could we invest it? How could we defund the police to refund communities? Well, for the same amount of money, we could build 18 restorative justice centers. We could provide a $10,000 child tax care income credit. When 48% of children in Detroit are living in poverty. We could create mental health and rehabilitation facilities with beds for 244 patients. We could create over 10,000 living wage jobs. We could house every documented homeless person in Detroit in $90,000 homes. We could renovate and modernize all DPS schools. There's so many other ways we could utilize this money that would promote community safety. Other alternatives that would make our community safer. We could stop profit-seeking traffic enforcement and use money to actually fund our courts adequately rather than funding them based on fines and fees generated from poor people. We could create robust services for returning citizens in Wayne County. We could increase resources and access to mental health. We could in-cash bail and use some of the money by not having to utilize bail bondsmen and other things like that to increase community safety. And just to drive the point home, I want to indicate some things locally and nationally that have happened on this landscape so that we can begin to really realize that this is not pie in the sky thinking, this is tangible. So the Ann Arbor City Council recently unanimously voted to support developing an unarmed, non-police response, similar to 911, but utilizing an alternate number to respond to mental health emergencies. Hennepin County deputies, I believe that's in Minnesota, they decided to change their system to hand out repair vouchers instead of tickets. So again, this is really helpful where a lot of the time someone's entryway into the justice system is a ticket for something like a broken tail light or a cracked windshield that they can't afford to get fixed. And so if we had maybe unarmed non-police responders who could give traffic tickets, but also give out repair vouchers, we might not only see safer drivers on the road, but we might also decrease the number of police interactions that lead to police shootings and things of that nature. In Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti authorized cutting $100 million to $150 million from the LAPD budget to invest those funds in communities of color that are generally over-policed and victimized by mass incarceration. And then the Denver School Board voted unanimously to remove police from public schools, which again is kind of a place where we see in the budget a lot of money is spent. And so really, I just want to end with this: divesting promotes police accountability. For one, it reveals overspending. It shows where overfunding is not working to rebut carceral narratives that departments just need more money to be effective. It promotes refunding communities because it requires an analysis of what services are being neglected to fund policing in order to redirect some of this funding towards community resources. And then lastly, it's kind of the perform reform narrative. It allows community members to hold police accountable for their performance or lack thereof, to hold municipalities accountable for their spending on police, and gives the community grounds to advocate for police reform or abolition. And so that concludes what I had to share about DJC's work. And Danny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Erin, for that very informative presentation. As a native of Detroit, it's definitely refreshing to know that work is being done around the concerns of policing once you cross 8 Mile. So thank you very much for sharing that. And again, to our viewers, if at any time you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat box or utilize the Q&A feature on Zoom. For those of you who may tune in via Facebook, put your questions in the comments and we will get them answered. And thank you again, Erin, for that. And just moving forward, I definitely want to chime in with you, Willie and Isaac. You guys have been doing some amazing work around police accountability in Grand Rapids. So please, would you share with us what you've been working on?
Sure. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Erin. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate that. Some great facts. What I'm going to do, since Isaac and myself are from the same organization, I'm going to share where we came from and how do we get to this point. And after that point, I'll turn it over to Isaac. So, LINC Up's mission is moving equity into action by increasing community power and creating affordable housing. In the beginning, back 2009, 2008, LINC Up was a housing organization. As we grew, we knew that by transforming homes and building homes in communities, there were other things that needed to be addressed. Many times we place people in homes, but we weren't addressing all those other things and factors that played into being a homeowner, living in marginalized communities. So we wanted to start to address those things. Again, as we began organizing, listening to the community, over time, we kept hearing the same sentiment: police accountability. The police can basically do whatever they want to, say whatever they want to, and it's us against them, and us usually loses that fight. So back in 2014, we organized the community after long periods of listening, and decided to step into the advocacy realm. And we knew in Grand Rapids there had been some advocacy efforts, but not a large enough scale to really make that difference, in that we had a population that had not actually advocated for themselves or felt comfortable advocating for themselves. So back in 2014, we organized over 500 people to take trips down to city commission because of police violence, police brutality, lack of accountability, and a lack of proof towards our residents when it was, again, us against them making those claims. So we knew that in order to ensure victory, in order to grow our constituency, we had to address the low-hanging fruit. What we did was we organized around the body cameras in our community. So within 6 weeks, we took over 500 people down to city commission to advocate for body cameras. Something unheard of with the body cameras was this was placed into action within 6 weeks because of community resilience, community pushing for this action. So we knew that there was no silver bullet, but we had to utilize that low-hanging fruit to start the ball moving. So once that ball started to move, we understood, okay, now we can start to do some more things. We pushed for the police relations, developing a 12-point plan. These things were committed to, they were done, but we didn't see any action behind it. There were numerous studies, numerous traffic studies done, many like the statistics that Erin showed earlier in her presentation. We came out with the same results, but there were nothing done with these results. So we had the city paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for these studies, the firms coming back with the proof saying that this is what's happening, that Blacks were more than 2 times likely to be stopped by the police than a white counterpart in the same area. And there was still no accountability that has happened. We then pushed for a deployment analysis. The results were the same. Recommission some of the union officers so that we could use uncommissioned officers in the police force to do some of the work that needed to be done. But we still run into the same roadblock. We still have much work to do around the fight that we continue to have with the union. So here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, it seems that our community, other than our marginalized community, love the police, and they continue to grow, and we continue to fight against the growing budgets, and then utilizing those funds for a better purpose in our community, such as mental health and things like that. Like as Erin mentioned, the unarmed response would be something that would be greatly appreciated by marginalized people in our communities, but we never can seem to cross that threshold. So as we continue to work, we worked with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and had over 80 testimonies of police wrongdoing. The community members came together. They had their testimonies taped. recorded by the Michigan Department of Civil Rights for racial discrimination. And it was found that the Grand Rapids Police Department were guilty of racial discrimination. We're still fighting that fight, and we're still not seeing the results that we want to see within our community. So from that study back in 2019, we moved more into the advocacy work of changing the policy. And from here, I'll turn the microphone over to Isaac, and he will expound on where we are from 2019 to now.
Thanks, Will. Can I have the next slide, please? So Erin did a really great job, laying out why we need this divest invest work. And so I'm kind of lay out our efforts advocating for divest invest in Grand Rapids. And I'm really going to focus on May, June, July in 2020, when there was all these heightened attention on policing. So even before George Floyd was murdered, we had budget decisions that were happening in early May, and COVID was we were kind of a couple months into COVID, and they were kind of worried about the budget, and the GRPD proposed a number of cuts that really we thought was going to hurt their diversity efforts and hurt their community engagement. So some of the things that GRPD proposed to cut was stop paying recruits to go through the police academy, to end a program to gauge resident sense of trust and safety in police, and to freeze the hiring of 2 full-time civilian positions and 13 civilian internship positions, which again had come out of one of those studies that the police had paid for, saying you don't need sworn officers doing so many of these duties, right? You could have some civilian individuals, some civilian positions doing these duties to free up these officers' time, right? And that would again be more efficient use of the budget. So what we did is we sent out a statement and a petition of these budget cuts. We had 598 signatures of that petition, and we actually did have the city fall back on what those cuts were going to do. And 40 letters were sent by community members to commissioners, the mayor, and city manager, again to reiterate what the community is saying we thought about these budget cuts. Then George Floyd was unfortunately murdered, and we had protests in Grand Rapids. And the result of a lot of the news coverage of those protests was outcries over property damage, right? And again, it went to property damage, and we weren't talking about the issues that were kind of at firsthand of this. And what we did is we kind of took this as an opportunity of, we need change. And the city came out and said they needed more time to look at, what are the accountability measures we need to do. And, as Willie just said, we had 5 years and hundreds of recommendations of what should be done, and we just kept not getting action for it, right? And then after that unfortunate event, and we had heightened attention on it, the city is again saying, hey, we need time to figure this out. Give us this time. If you go to the next slide. So again, we couldn't do this without our partners. So at the top there you see LINC Up, but also Urban Core Collective and the NAACP of Greater Grand Rapids. And together, we again did another petition and developed an accountability plan that we asked folks to sign on. And we had over 3,000 residents sign this petition, right? So incredible response, number of people reached. And what we asked for was that structural changes to the GRPD to address the concerns raised in the previous studies and reports. So again, they've already paid for these reports. They know what these recommendations are. Let's just actually implement them. And we also asked for a commitment to open public meetings for negotiations to change the existing or new collective bargaining agreements with the police union, right? As Willie mentioned, the police union has tremendous influence and power here in Grand Rapids. And so opening those negotiations up in a transparent manner and for residents to be a part of them, really we thought was an important piece. Kind of the third thing we asked for was ongoing input and support from the community for the plans, strategies, and tactics for the GRPD, right? Again, making sure that the community is a part of these decisions that are being made and actually potentially, hopefully leading these discussions, right? And then we also asked that they expanded funding for the Office of Accountability and Oversight to national standards of 3% of the police budget. So they had formed this Department of Accountability and Oversight, but they hadn't funded it, right? There was, I think, one director at the time, and he just didn't have the capacity to do the work that he was really assigned to do. So we were saying, okay, please, take some money from this police budget and put it to this OPA, the Office of Public Oversight and Accountability, so they can do the job that they are hired to do. And so after kind of this work, this petition and this pressure that we applied, the city came out in a press conference and they agreed to release a plan of action within 60 days in response to our petition. Just kind of move on to the next slide. So again, the city was asking for more time to do this, and we kept putting the pressure on, realizing, getting the word out in various forms. So this graphic on the left was, we did a graphic on city leader stance. So some folks had publicly supported us. They had, given their word, they had said that they were behind us, but we hadn't seen action yet. We highlighted those in yellow, and then we had some folks that hadn't given us any public support yet. We also, top right, it might be cut off, but we compared past budgets and our current budget, again, to show that right now we're operating at a much higher percentage of the city budget than we did, 20, 30 years ago. And then kind of at the bottom, we also had, if you go previous slide, thanks. And we also had a, call to action where please, call your commissioners, call the city manager, hold them accountable and say what we need, right? So one of the things that we have in our city charter is that 32% of our city's budget has to be spent on policing. That's a charter mandate. But unfortunately, the city was even spending more than that, right? They're spending closer to 40%. So we were at least saying, okay, bring it down to that 32%. That's 7% of our city budget that we could reapply to the community and to other efforts, and to the efforts that Erin mentioned were so important in that invest model. So you kind of move on. So unfortunately, or what I should say, that we had tremendous response to that. We had a city commission meeting where we had 5 hours of public comment of folks calling it in, demanding accountability, demanding a transparency, demanding a reduction of the GRPD budget to 32%. And we actually had a city commissioner during that meeting call for a reduction of the budget to 32%. Unfortunately, the city attorney and city manager use administrative processes to halt that budget decision. They said that the city manager is the only one with power to make budget decisions, in the middle of a budget year, and that he wasn't willing to look at that until November. And so, despite 5 hours of public comment, it was 1 or 2 a.m. and having the votes on city commission to do this reduction down to the 32% minimum, we had this administrative procedure get in our way and unfortunately kind of halt that progress. So what we have kind of done in turn lately is we've kind of pivoted to take a little bit more of a proactive approach. So we've launched the community-owned safety campaign, which again is with our partners, the Urban Core Collective, the NAACP of Grand Rapids, and the ACLU of Michigan. We're trying to really redefine what public safety is in Grand Rapids. So the definition that we and our community has established is that public safety is a result of significant investment in community resources, services, and programs that lead to better housing, health outcomes, and economic opportunities. To achieve true public safety, the community must have a greater influence on the city of Grand Rapids budget priorities. And so our kind of campaign has 3 goals, which is to inform the Grand Rapids community of how the city of Grand Rapids sets its spending and budget priorities, to create the opportunity for the community to weigh in on setting spending and budget priorities, and to develop a widely shared definition of public safety that is rooted in community voice. Right. So again, trying to be proactive, recognizing that the city is saying, okay, we only talk about the budget during budget time. All right, let's rally the community around these budget decisions. And so we can, again, say, please divest from policing. Let's, go down to our 32% mandated charter minimum and devote that other percentage to other community resources that, again, as Erin so well mentioned, that are more effective than what police are, right, in these issues. And that is what we had to share for today. So thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Willie, for your presentation. Again, very informative and not surprising to hear that the research that you all have done, you've all come to the same conclusion that Erin Keith had at DJC, which just shows what's going on across the state in Detroit and Grand Rapids, which leads us to our next presenter, Ms. Shelli Weisberg. Thank you so much for patiently waiting. I know you have an overview of the legislative landscape and what's going on right now in the state of Michigan. And before you begin to present, again, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions at any time, please put them in the chat box or utilize the Q&A feature For those of you on Facebook, put your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them. So yeah, let's turn it over to you, Shelli, for your presentation, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny. So I'm going to just go over kind of what we're seeing in the legislature in terms of police reform. And I mean, no surprise, right, that the bills introduced in Michigan's Senate and House to address police accountability, they don't come anywhere near the embracing the solutions that Erin laid out in her presentation, or, you know, embracing the recommendations that LINC Up makes. And I think what really heartens me is the work being done at the local levels that you're seeing here by LINC Up and by DJC. It's where the work needs to be done. I think it's the only way to get it done. And I say that after kind of working in the legislature for over 20 years and just not seeing enough progress. But let me at least, you know, tell you about the bills that are introduced. So there's a bipartisan package in the Michigan State Senate of 12 to 13 bills that are focused on addressing really two things. One is police abuse of force, like chokeholds and no-knock warrants that have resulted in so many deaths in the communities of color. And these bills, try to, they don't literally ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants. They just try to make them less prevalent. And then the second thing the bills address are training and analysis of policing best practices, with a focus on building an expectation of professionalism in the profession, and policing based on community values. So this package was led by Senator Stephanie Chang, who's a great friend of this community. And there's been a tremendous amount of work on this package of bills, and Senator Chang has impressively built a truly powerful coalition. The Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee has taken hundreds of hours of testimony from stakeholders, and the committee chair, Senator Roger Victory, has managed those hearings, I think, in a very respectful way, and the hearings have been informative. And it really looked for a while like there was going to be a chance of moving this common sense, although minor package of bills to the governor's desk. But the House of Representatives decided to advance an alternate narrative. Speaker Jason Wentworth announced at the end of last year that the bills would not do well in the House, and he declared that the House was taking a different approach. He said they wanted to change the narrative and the way police are viewed in Michigan. Speaker Wentworth preferred to put on his blinders and claim that the police reform Senate package was legislating in search of a problem. He claimed that in Michigan, police don't use excessive force and they're not involved in unjustified shooting. Under Speaker Wentworth's leadership, the House then passed a funding package to fund recruiting and retaining police officers, and that did include an optional de-escalation training. So at this point, the Senate package of bills, they've been through a lot of scrutiny. Both Senator Chang and Committee Chair Victory are confident that the legislation upholds the right standards for professional policing and provides the accountability necessary to prevent damage to communities being served. But as advocates, and I think what you're seeing here is our job is really to advance the narrative that we support investing in public safety. And that means if you're having police forces or community safety forces, you're recruiting and training and retaining professionals for a model that best serves individual communities. But I think we have to refuse to ignore the reality of the damage wrought by over policing, by bias policing, and just frankly, way too many abusive and unfit police officers. These bills haven't moved since last year, and I don't have an update as to whether they're going to move.
And thank you, Shelli, for that overview of the current legislative landscape in the state of Michigan in regards to police accountability and divest, invest. And of course, we do have a few questions that I'm going to pose. Of course, some of these questions are specifically to a panelist. Some questions, of course, feel free to all panelists to chime in. So our first question is, this is directed to you, Erin, but again, if anybody else would like to chime in, and the question is, why are we so quick to put more funding into policing when we know it's not operating at the level it should be, and so hesitant to put money into addressing more front-end diversion practices?
That's a great question. So I really think that the reason is fear and a lack of vision and scarcity, if you will. If you live in a community that's always been over policed, you can't imagine a reality that doesn't look like that. Also, I think it really is the fear. When we look at the media and like the propaganda, if you will, of all of these television shows and different things, like always portraying the police as heroes and the police as coming in and saving the day or finding the serial killer or doing, something like that, when in reality, that's not what the average police officer spends the majority of their day doing. And so again, that's not to belittle their efforts, but it's more so to say, I think the media's portrayal of policing leads to our reliance on policing and our hesitancy to say, hey, if there's crime in my community, maybe there's another way to solve this challenge. I think another really important thing that I recently wrote, I guess not recent now, it was August of last year, but I wrote a op-ed all about policing in Detroit and kind of why police won't necessarily make our community safer. And it was in response to a poll that came out that indicated that many older Detroiters in particular said they wanted an increase in police presence. And I kind of unpacked some of the reasons that might be, that a lot of times it really is, you call the police and they may or may not come. So then your natural instinct is, well, we need more police. But the reality is, if we don't continue to ask why, if we don't continue to say, how is this particular incident of violence happening? What are the actors that lead a person to commit this type of crime? What supports does a person who has committed this crime, who will ultimately re-enter the community, what supports does that individual need? Then we end up living in a police state and it's incredibly short-sighted. It doesn't actually further our ultimate objective of having a community that actually feels safe. And the bigger thing is, the last point I'll make, is people always say, why do you have to use the word defund the police or the phrase defund the police? It's so inflammatory. Well, there are a couple of reasons I think that phrase really matters a lot. One, people were saying reform the police for decades and nothing happened or very little. So clearly that phrase was not inflammatory enough because we weren't having these types of discussions with the interest that defund the police has generated. The second reason is that, as I showed in the budget, a lot of the time, the excuse for why other things are underfunded is because we don't have the money for it. So like, if we magically had this giant pot of money that was just, never ending, then sure, we could fund the police however much and fund the communities however much. But it just is crazy to me that while we're living through a pandemic and, a public health crisis, we'll say, hey, we know that, but we'll just continue spending $1 and $3 on policing and neglecting all of these other areas. That's where it gets to the point where it's illogical. And I think reasonable minds can agree that prioritizing health and housing and all of these other things make people less likely to even turn to criminality as a option for their needs. So.
And thank you, Erin. Would any of the other panelists like to address that? Okay, thank you. We definitely have a few more questions. The next being, how can community members and organizations support and get involved with efforts like you all have presented? and that is to all panelists.
I would say find your local nonprofit that focuses on these issues. Get involved. Information is power. Being present at City Commission, making your voice heard, just being involved. We know that, like in our beginning phases, when we 500 people at City Commission was unheard of, and for that many eyes to be placed on community leaders who rely on votes to be in those seats, that put pressure on those community members, those civic leaders to do the right thing. And the more eyes that we put on that subject is the more pressure that we put on the City Commission. So just being involved, sharing information with the community, and what we do is try to expand networks. So as expanding networks, the more you know, the more options you have, the more you can get involved, and just being present in the community, speaking up, using your voice to advocate for yourself and community will make a world of difference when you're dealing in the advocacy world.
I think the other thing that I think people are kind of reluctant to do, especially in this kind of polarized community living, is really talk to your family and neighbors. Like Erin mentioned the polling, why people don't want their police to go away. They don't know how to unpack it. And I know we did some polls around communities and Taylor and Grand Rapids, and people are reluctant to say that they want the police to go away. But I think it's because, as Erin said, they don't know what another option is. So I think really having those neighbor to neighbor talks, family to family talks, so you can help people walk through the options that Erin and that DJC and Link Up are presenting here would be very powerful.
And just to echo what the other panelists shared, I would also say, don't underestimate the power of contacting your legislator and talking with them if you're passionate about a particular issue. I would also say the same way we were able to find through community partners, like a lot of budget data, look up, a lot of this data is publicly available. You can look up what your municipality is spending on policing and advocate among your council members or whatever equivalent is applicable to your municipality and say, hey, why are we spending this much? Another area that gets overlooked a lot is how much your municipality might be paying out in settlements in instances where there's police brutality. And that a lot of times that's not even factored into the budget. It's like, we're, in addition to what's budgeted, there's settlement costs where an officer is a bad actor and they don't want it public. So that's another avenue as well in terms of getting involved in police abolition work. But the final thing I would say is similar to what Shelli shared, start really brainstorming with your community members. What could we fund instead? Like if you're seeing an issue, instead of saying, wow, I'd really like the police to do something about that, maybe go a step further and say, wow, I would really like to solve this problem. How could I solve this problem? Or what could we fund to solve this problem? If there's drug use or something in your community, maybe not saying, wow, I wish the police would come arrest these people. Maybe say like, wow, I wish there were more recovery houses, or I wish there was some way to assist these individuals to stop this particular challenge. So I think we have to reframe how we think about problems, because as Angela Davis says, prisons don't disappear social problems, they disappear people. So it's kind of indicative upon us, or imperative upon us is what I wanted to say, for us to really begin those conversations.
Yes, thank you all for responding to that question. We have another, and this one is for you, Willie. And the question is, do the people who love the police say why? Do they believe, against all evidence, that more money for police makes the community safer?
First off, I want to start by saying, love is an extreme, just as hate is an extreme. So we're not saying that we hate the police or everybody loves the police or hates the police. We don't hate the police. We just feel like if we can bring that proof to you, if we can bring to the community all of the consultation firms that did all the traffic studies, that did the deployment studies, hold the police accountable to the data that they have. But just like Erin said, it is about fear. If you can stoke fear in Grand Rapids, a majority of the Black and brown population stay on the southeast and southwest side of town. So when news comes on, crime happened on the southeast side of town, or crime happened on the southwest side of town, and you can stoke that fear, and again make police the heroes in every situation. The majority of people who might say there's no police brutality, that may never see that in their lifetime, are watching from the outside, and they don't necessarily believe what they're seeing or what they're hearing, because again, the cops have been portrayed as these superhero cops that, jump over trash cans and catch felons and all these things that generally don't happen during the day in the life of a cop. And when we say, yes, it's about money. It's about that 7% is upwards of $9 million. There have not been any organizations or places like Network 180 that could use these funds for mental health issues, to respond to right along with cops for mental health stops and things like that could use these funds to stop some of the police brutality, because cops are not mental health experts. So they're taking everything at face value, and if somebody's acting funny, they're committing a crime. So as long as there is a fear that people are stoked with, and as long as people feel like I can be told that the police are doing everything right, there will be a comfortability in saying, hey, we do need more police, because I just heard a story on the news and everybody on the southwest side is going to take over the rest of the city.
Yeah, thank you for that, Willie. And we have one more question, which is directed at you, Isaac. And the question is, can you say more about how you made the police negotiations open to the public?
Oh, we unfortunately we weren't necessarily successful. That was one of our demands, right? So on our petition, it was, hey, we want these union contracts to be open to the public. And the city came back and said, give us 60 days to form a new plan. They did come out with a new strategic plan that has some benefits, but also some things we're not necessarily super excited about. And also, right, it's not necessarily getting implemented at the moment either. So yeah, that wasn't necessarily something we've achieved, but that is it was more an ask that we had, and something that we were going to continue to fight for, because again, so much is controlled in those union contracts. So having the community have a voice and transparency during that is just key to this work.
Thank you, Isaac.
Yeah.
And as we begin to close out, I definitely would like to thank our guests, Erin Keith, Shelli Weisberg, Willie Patterson, Isaac DeGraaf, for sharing your incredible work. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. As I told you at the beginning, if you stuck around, I was going to tell you exactly how you can become a member of MI-CEMI, and this is how. You can visit MI-CEMI's webpage at michigancollaborative.org. You can go to the join section, click sign on to MI-CEMI's resolution, which means that you are just in agreement with MI-CEMI's efforts to end mass incarceration here in the state of Michigan. That is definitely how you can become a member. We also would like to encourage you to also take this call of action. House Bills 5380 through 5383 will strengthen the standards for providing vital documents to people coming home from prison. So we're asking if you have struggled in obtaining your vital docs upon your release from prison, or if you know anyone that has, please email Chuck Warpahowski at chuckw@MI-CEMI.org and describe what impact not having these vital docs upon release has meant for you. Also, we would like for you to be able to place on your calendars the date of April 14th, 2022, 11 a.m. to noon will be MI-CEMI's next webinar entitled Home and Hired. This will be co-hosted by MI-CEMI steering team member organization, Center for Employment Opportunities, which will focus on employment for people returning home from prison. And more information and registration will come out prior to the event. Again, that's April 14th, 2022, 11 a.m. to noon. I believe that's a Thursday. Please join us for that webinar. Also, we ask that you all support the Day of Empathy coming up here, March 22nd from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. This will be an in-person event. I also believe it may be a hybrid, but I do know that this will be an in-person event, panel discussions around voting rights for people with criminal records, bail reform proposals, ending juvenile life without parole sentencing, and a special focus on incarcerated women here in the state of Michigan. Again, register for the Day of Empathy. The link is in the chat box. Again, thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned to MI-CEMI. Be well, stay safe. Peace and love, everybody.